Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Dai Manuel. Dai, welcome.
Great to be here, Thomas. I'm really excited, or as I said earlier, stoked to be here. Very Canadian term, as you can guess. And as we're talking, people will probably pick up the Canadian accent every once in a while. When I get really excited, I talk a little bit faster, and my oots and aboots will start to fall out of my mouth. So apologizes in advance. And again, that's another very Canadian trait. Apologize for everything. But that's it. I'm stoked to be here.
Well, I'm stoked to have you.
Right on. Yeah. That's great. That's great.
Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, sure. Well, I'm 44 years young, I like to think, and I'll be here for another 100. Well, if all things go well, knock on wood. I'm a dad of two teenage girls. They're now 16 and 18. Well, actually, my youngest will be 16 after this weekend. And so that's just a whole nother dynamic, and I've been dating my wife for the last 21, going on 22 years, which, those two titles, dad and partner for life, those are the things that actually get me the most excited. But as far as like, what do I do on the day to day? I've been an entrepreneur now for 26 years. I've had a number of businesses, most of them in the health and wellness space. I'm just about helping people get out of their own way, whether that be psychologically, emotionally, physically, usually a combination of all of those. and I support them with just really leaning into their best version of themselves and provide them lots of tools, resources to do so, and do a lot of speaking. Recently had my first TEDx talk, very exciting. I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that today, but the last 5 years we've been traveling, and now are back in our home base in Vancouver. Came back pre-COVID, and I'm sure that'll come out in our story as well. But that's sort of me in a snapshot as to what I'm doing right now. But unfortunately, I don't know if you've noticed this, Thomas, but with the various lockdowns, the flow, I feel like this has been my view for the last year and a few. So not a lot of other exciting stuff to talk about, but it's all good. I know that this too shall pass.
Well, I can't tell too much from here, but it looks like a pretty nice view.
You know what? It's not bad. I'm not complaining. I live in an area called Yaletown, which is downtown Vancouver, and I know you visited here before, and maybe you remember downtown. There's a nice little walk around the water called the Seawall, and it basically goes all around the downtown core along Stanley Park, a big park area, and we literally live right on the seawall. So I feel very blessed and grateful for this view and to be able to call this home for sure.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, you touched on the topic of getting out of your own way. I kind of feel like the people who have expertise, maybe in those types of areas, have gone through it themselves and have overcome it.
Sure.
So, touching on your story and through the lens of entrepreneurship, where would you say your story begins?
Well, it's interesting. When I think about all of us, right, just life, humanity, a pretty cool thing about humans, our existence just proves our resiliency as a species, right down to our DNA. And, you call that evolution, you call it just sheer will for survival, right? And of course, it's evolved into many other things, and being that we're pretty much the only species on this planet that can self-actualize, can actually have that conversation and envision bigger than life kind of purposes, right? Like, it's amazing, right? That sense of purpose that I think we all have deep down. And obviously that's evolved over the millennia, but things are a little bit different today than they were 2,000 years ago. But really, right down to the core DNA, I think it's just that resiliency and our ability to adapt to change. And yet, that being said, as adaptable as we may be, we are quite change resistant. At least I myself have found it many periods of my life. I've been just trying to fight the change that was coming, even though deep down I knew I wanted to make some changes. And I think that's sort of a conundrum, right? Like we get into that space. We know there's things in our life that's limiting us. And to sort of riff on Joseph Campbell, I don't know if you're familiar with the power of myth, but in marketing, it's sort of been riffed on some of his teachings. Now we often hear the hero's journey referenced, and that was something that he coined back in the 70s. And he was a historian and just someone that studied storytelling. and through the millennia. And because that's how we learn, it's how we grow, it's how we connect, is that sharing of stories. But he talks about this idea of us as a human species, all and individuals always wanting to follow our bliss, choosing to live a life that allows us to maximize happiness, joy, fulfillment. Now, again, that's different for all of us. We have a different idea of what fulfills us, but it doesn't mean we don't go after it. But usually going after it involves banging our heads up against a lot of challenges, getting beat up a little bit, either literally or metaphorically. And we challenge that resiliency. We challenge the change. And when I think back to my very first time where I really encountered that and had a completely different understanding of it was when I was 14. I was at that time classified by the doctor, just because he pulled my mom out of his office, to Betty Ann, your son Dai is morbidly obese. Now, again, I did not understand what morbidly obese meant, and to be fair, this is dating myself 30 years ago. Childhood obesity, it just wasn't a thing yet. There wasn't like all these articles and publications talking about childhood obesity. There was me and one other kid in my entire graduating class that was in that state of unhealth. So it wasn't a norm. I was very much a minority, even though size-wise, I was definitely a majority. So it was hard. Life was hard, and anyone who's dealt with any health challenges, whether it be chronic or fleeting, it's never fun. It really pushes on us in a lot of different ways. And I was quite depressed and withdrawn. And, I just didn't know what to do. I had parents, I had friends, I had a lot of communities that cared about me. They loved me. And, every time they would come saying, hey, trying to encourage me and support me and help me in getting healthier. Every time that would happen, I was like, you're thinking I'm not good enough. You're saying I'm fat. You're saying I'm not worthy. Like, this is my own inner voice, right? Like, and I don't know if you can relate to this, Thomas, but, there's those people that see us suffering and all they want to do is help us. They want to help us fix it, right? Help us be happier. And yet every time that would come, I was like, no, you're attacking me. You don't think I'm good enough. Like, it was just really interesting space to be. And of course, I didn't have the awareness to be able to reflect on this at the time, but through life, seeing things repeat itself, I've built a much more awareness around what was going on at the time. Plus, I've done quite a bit of work around this. Long and short of it, I got to a point where enough was enough. And I was very fearful, a lot of fear, especially around me and living and life. I was like, I remember getting to a point where I came to this realization that life probably won't be any better than it is at this exact moment at 14, right? At 14, I'm like, this is probably as good as it's going to get if I'm thinking I'm going to stay and continue to do what I've been doing up to this point, meaning that play a lot of video games, watch a lot of movies, eat a lot of calories, but not nutritious calories. These are empty calories, very poor on the nutrition value. And so that was really feeding in, pardon the pun, into that state of obesity. And it got to a point where I was like, geez, maybe life would be easier if I just wasn't here. And that was really hard, to come to that place and to actually be thinking about, like, how would I do it? How would I end this? And ultimately I was more afraid of that, than the idea of change. And that's really what it came down to. I started to ask myself, well, okay, if I don't make some changes 5 years from now, when I'm almost 20 years old, do I actually think that life will be better than it is right now? No. So I was more afraid of staying as I was or it getting worse than I was of the idea of maybe trying to do something different. Maybe actually embracing this idea of trying to change rather than being so resistant to everything. And, it was like, and it happens so quickly, right? And I want people to understand, anyone that's watching or listening to this, and Thomas, maybe you can relate to this. If you think back to those some of the biggest struggles that you've encountered in your life that have been put in your way, when you make that decision to challenge that and to do something different, to change your perspective, to just, there's that mental shift. It happens so fast, like literally in a split of a second. It's like, okay, I'm changing. And then you got to follow that up with an action, right? Like, it's great to have the choice and that decision, but unless you actually do something, it's just a great idea. It's a great intention, but and it's got plenty of potential there, but it won't be realized until you start doing something. And so I went out and I talked to my dad. I remember I had this big cry session in the bathroom by myself, lonesome. And I came out of there, got, toweled off and dressed, and came and found my dad in the living room. I was like, Dad, I don't want to be like this anymore. I don't like who I am. I know I can change. I want to get healthy. And I said, can I get a mountain bike? At 14, I remember being, as a kid, I used to love riding my bike. And there's no way I was going to go to a gym. I was like, I am not stepping foot into a gym. I don't know how to use any of those machines. People will stare at me. I got to do this on my own. Like I was very intimidated. So I wanted something that would be very isolating, something I could do on my own, not to be dependent on anybody else. Like that's just where my mind was. And so he looked at me and he could tell there was conviction in my eyes, like he could tell that, whoa, there's something here. You got to strike that iron while it's hot, to pardon the cliche, but it was really that moment. And you know what? That afternoon, we went out and got me a mountain bike. That afternoon, getting back from the bike shop, I went for my first ride. And every day after that, I'd go out for a ride. I went to the library, also got books on it to educate myself on nutrition and on fitness and health, and really just started to feed my mind with good resources, to help continue that change. And 20 months later, I remember waking up one day and it just felt like everything was just in motion and I didn't have to work anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like it just felt like things were flowing. This was now my lifestyle. But it was 20 months. And I like people to know that. Like they're like, well, when did it become a habit? I'm like, I have no idea. There was no question in my mind. This is all I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get healthy. And because I have those little wins along the way, and I can elaborate on that a little bit later, but there's little things, little victories I had, and being able to celebrate the changes that were happening and feeling very, very much I influenced these changes because of the choices and the actions I was making. So there was that instant connection that, change isn't always bad. And you know what? I can be a champion of change. I don't have to fight this thing all the time. And that was my first real taste of that kind of a pivotal moment in my life. Here in Canada, we have something called the Sports Network. They call it TSN. It's our national sports network on TV. And they have a thing called the TSN turning point. It's that moment where the underdog, might have that quick breakaway and they score, right? And it's like, whoa, upset. And it's like, I think we all have those TSN turning points in our lives, right? We have those moments where all of a sudden it's like something that we couldn't do before, we do it for the first time. And, going from 0 to 1 is 100% improvement. There's nothing as satisfactory as doing something for the very first time. And, because after that, it's diminishing returns. So, that first time is always the biggest win. And so I'm a big fan of really trying to champion people's victories, help them appreciate that, hey, that first step you took, I know it was hard, but that is where it all begins. And you should celebrate the fact that you took that action, you did it, and so I'm sort of that guy that likes to celebrate just did it rather than just do it, and Nike will probably kick my ass for that, but you know what I mean? It's because really it's the act of celebrating I've already done it. Now that is awesome, right? Rather than I'm going to motivate you, just do it. No. I want you to celebrate when you just did it, So that's sort of that origin story. That's where things started. And obviously things I've encountered many other challenges along the way, but whether chronic autoimmune disease diagnosed a few years ago to overcoming my challenges and my abuses of alcohol and certain narcotics, there's been some very trying moments in my life, but it was that first one that gave me the confidence that change is always possible and I can influence it.
I find a lot of sports achievements can carry over nicely into business. So I find that achievement probably helps a lot later on in life, I would imagine. But do you have any, I'm not sure if it's the right word, but resentment over being put in that position at the age of 14?
To be honest with you, Thomas, yeah, I did. I harbored a lot of resentment. I had a lot of anger. Frustration, but it's probably actually better, but both with myself, but prior to me fully taking ownership of my situation, really getting honest with the habits that I had at the time. Like nobody was forcing me to do any of that. No one forced me to play video games, to say no to hanging out with friends, to playing, I was always presented with opportunity. I just was always choosing not to. And I was choosing to eat the way I was eating. Now, my parents, yeah, did they enable me? Sure. But they were doing the best they could with what they had. And they didn't really know, like it's not like today. Like we have so much more awareness just on nutrition, on metabolism, like just the science of nutrition. It didn't exist 100 years ago, and we're still figuring stuff out. And so it took me a lot of years to get to that point where I could forgive them, but because it was never their fault, but I did blame them. I blamed them. I blamed, I blamed everybody but myself, to be quite frank. It was just, but that's where I was 14 as well, and everything, especially when you're in that state of unhealth, everything is just compounded, it's just so much more difficult, more challenging. I mean, I had classes on the 3rd floor of my high school, and I remember getting to the top of those stairs. I'd be huffing and puffing, I'd light sweat on already. Man, that was so difficult. 3 flights of stairs, even tying my shoes, like just all the littlest of things that we take for granted. It was all so hard, So was there resentment? Absolutely. Was there anger, frustration? Yeah. But learning to harness that and shift it into creating something new for me, there was a leap of faith there. It was just trust. Excuse me. There was 3 questions that, I'd love to share with you a little bit later, because for people that are looking or feeling that urge to make some changes, and I think it sort of starts like a little, well, think about when you get an itch, right? Like, you get that little itch on the nose sometimes, right? It's like almost the precursor to a sneeze, but it's just sort of starting there. And it's like, oh yeah, you can feel it. I can tell that there's something there. Oh yeah. And we start moving our nose around, trying to squish up our cheeks to try to itch that itch. There comes a point where you just can't tolerate it anymore. It's like, freaking, I want to itch this thing, and I look at some of the ways that I've encountered challenges, and some of them have been so small that they're easy to ignore. Just change my focus, but they're still there. I can feel it. There's something there and it doesn't feel right. I can tell it's limiting maybe my happiness, maybe my joy, maybe my ability to do something that I really want to do for me. We ultimately have to get to a place where we just can't tolerate it anymore. It's like, no, that's enough. I'm not going to stand for this anymore. And I think we all get to that point at different times, but we all get there eventually. And anybody I've ever seen have major changes and shifts or pivots in their life, big change. It's not something that just happened on a whim. It's usually built up to that over time, but we get to that point and it's like, okay, well, I either accept that I'm the one that's going to have to make some changes here to change my situation, or I'm not. But if I'm not, it's like, I better stop complaining about it. At least that, and that was the way I had to get to. I had to get to the point where I just I can't talk about my frustration anymore if I'm not willing to do anything about it.
Yeah, it seems a little unjust to happen at such a young age, but I also think learning that lesson at that time is probably very beneficial at the same time. So 20 months later, what's next for you? What happens?
Well, it was interesting because at this point in time in my life, coming into my late teen years, I now have, Thomas, between you and I and anybody who's listening or watching this, when we hear the terms intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, right? There's sort of those internal drivers as well as the external motivators. So, as an example, if you're in a career and you're being, got a little bonus being dangled to hit a certain sales target, well, that would be an extrinsic motivation, but there might be an internal driving, there might be something that's very egocentric that's driving us towards. I know for myself, in my past sales experience, it was like, I want to be number one on the sales board, I want to be at the top. It definitely ego driving that. So that the internal value system of mine was, in my competitive nature, was there. But sorry, where were we going with that? I was just thinking about, what was your question?
It was about what's next for you?
17. Yes. Sorry. So here's the deal. At 17, I wanted a girlfriend. Okay. Like I wanted a girlfriend actually at 14, almost 15. Like that was my external motivator. I just wanted someone to want me. As a teen boy, that's just what I wanted. I saw my friends talking to girls. I saw girls interacting with them. And I was like, I want some of that. I want to interact with some girls. I want to have a girlfriend. And so at 17, I had a girlfriend now. And, but that was fun. but also the fact that I started to grow my social sphere as well. I started actually getting invited to go places because I was more outgoing. I was actually willing to have conversations with people now, where before I would shy away. I would sort of avoid it. I would be very much on my own.
You got some endorphins coming from the bike, probably make you feel a bit better.
Yes, absolutely. No, you're spot on. And so there's a lot of things that were changing, but I was still really young, very immature. But I started to really appreciate coaching. Now, I'd never coached anybody prior to that, but what started happening was friends of my parents, friends of friends who had seen this transformation literally over this 20 months. It's like night and day, you know, like very different. Of course, you can see in the face, same person, but everything changed. And so they started asking me questions. They'd come around and I'd be like, yeah, my mom's in the back, you know, and it's like, well, actually, we'll say hi to her in a sec, but we were here to talk to you. And I'm like, why? You want to talk to me? Why? And they said, well, we want to make some changes with our health. And we thought, you know, you'd be great to talk to. We see the life that you've been living, the lifestyle, to see the results that you've created for yourself. Can you help us? And I was like, okay. You know, I was excited. I was like, you actually care what I have to say. You trust my opinion. You're looking for me to support you. I want to support you. This is awesome. And that was where I got my first taste of coaching and mentorship. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. It made me feel really fulfilled, made me feel really good. But it also changed my level of accountability to myself, to be honest. Like because now it's like, oh, okay, well, I was doing a lot of these changes for me and also for a girlfriend, but I was doing it, you know, largely just thinking about me, where all of a sudden I realized that the things that I was doing, the way I was living my life, was actually becoming a positive influence in other people's lives. Mm-hmm. I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. This is cool. And so my own accountability to keep doing what I was doing obviously elevated. And I feel really confident that's what's also allowed me to just sustain that lifestyle for, you know, 30 plus years now. And so that's sort of what happened. And then eventually I moved from Ontario to Vancouver for university and got into equipment sales. And that just took off and founded a company and worked there for 17 years, you know, while I met my wife and had my kids and grew my network. And just, you know, it was, you know, I started adulting, right? And figuring things out. But I'd learned very quickly in my early 20s, because I still had, you know, some professionals have referred to it more as a social anxiety. That's what they think it sounds more like. But for me, it was just, I'd get around large groups and and I know that was influenced a lot from my early teen years, especially in that state of obesity. Like I avoided crowds. I just, the amount of self-consciousness that I had and that low self-opinion, you know, like just psychologically, I couldn't be around people, and it really affected how I interacted with people. And so all of a sudden now getting into my 20s, moving out on my own, like literally across the country, you know, it's like the two furthest points. And because I wanted to go somewhere where no one knew my past. Oh, I'm just letting you know that I'm straight up. Like I thought, you know, everybody in my town, they remembered the fat kid, right? Even my girlfriends, I'd have to date a year or two up because they wouldn't know me at that point. So they only knew me as the guy that I was now, you know? And so I was excited about this idea of starting fresh. But then I realized very early on that I discovered that alcohol was a really easy way to get comfortable very quickly and to open up and have conversations with people that are, you know, quite frankly, strangers or people I just want to connect and want to start making new friends. And it just became really easy. Again, this became my lifestyle. I knew at the end of a day, after a hard day, dealing with stress, dealing with people, a couple drinks, I'll feel better. I'll just numb things. I'll escape for a moment. And this just continued onward for many years, over a decade. This was my normal up until about 33. And that's where, you know, things just got really hard really quick, because now that lifestyle was really negatively affecting not only my career, but especially my family life. And to the point that, you know, my wife and I were entertaining separating and ultimately divorcing. And at that point, my kids were both under the age of 6. And it was a really rough patch in our relationship. And I was the one driving the challenges, you know, and based on my choices and based on my valuing alcohol and certain drugs over what I already had, what was right in front of me, these things that I'd worked so hard to achieve and create. And yet I was compromising all that by these other choices I was prioritizing, which were way outside of my value system, like they didn't even align. And, so you start getting into this sort of inner debate. It's like, okay, I'm saying this one thing and then I'm doing this. And you imagine me, a guy in the fitness and wellness industry in the space, like really, I have I've made some really interesting connections over the years and put a lot of content out there. And yet I felt like a fraud. And again, dealing with that negative energy and that negative thought pattern is like, oh, well, I know I could go have a workout. I'll do that, but then I'll chase it with some drinks, And it was just like over and over. And yeah, that's sort of where the TEDx talk actually talks a lot about that period. Well, briefly, that little story. My wife ultimately asked me a question one day. For those listening, this is the question. If there's ever been a question in my life that's made the biggest change for me, I'll just say it. My wife looked me in the eyes. We'd been crying. We're both bloodshot eyes at this point. It's about an hour into that conversation where we're trying to reconcile what are we going to do next. And she asked me, she said, Dai, are you being the type of man you want your daughters to marry? And I don't know, Thomas, but when she asked me that question, it was, I know it's kind of a pun here, but it was very sobering. Like it was in that moment, I just all of a sudden realized, you know what, this person that I've been, if someone like me at that moment, 11 plus years ago, showed up on my doorstep and said, hey, we'd like to meet your wife or meet your daughters, like, of course, not that age, but you know what I mean? Like if they were there and wanting to get to know my family, at a deeper level, I'd be like, no, you're not getting in here, man. Like, there's no way. But that's who I was. That's who I was role modeling. That's what I was patterning as being okay to my kids, which at the age of 4 and 6, and my wife as well. Like, that's just what I was doing. I was role modeling those behaviors and that was okay. And I made a commitment to them right then and there. I was going to go 1 year without drinking. That was it, just 1 year. Like, that's how it started. It wasn't like I got to quit. And there was no thoughts like, oh, I'm an alcoholic, again, I really struggle with that because I at any given time when I was making the choice to either not reply to my wife's text message, to say yes to my buds, to go to the pub, or stay a little bit longer on the 19th green after a round of golf, I was fully aware of all my choices. I was aware. I was making the choice to consume. At no point did I feel I was powerless. And so I made a decision 1 year. Thomas, that 1 year, at the age of 33, was one of the most interesting years of my life. Only because as soon as I said no to alcohol, I realized how much of a crutch it had become in my life. Because it was crazy. The first few weeks were agonizing. I had no idea what to do. No idea. I was just like, I do not have the faculties to deal with this. Because all of my life, it didn't change. Life was still happening. I was still dealing with all those other stresses, building and scaling my company, dealing with a lot of people. I had my family. We had other initiatives, charities that we were a part of. And the overwhelm was real. And, of course, my instincts like, oh, geez, I need a drink. And so here I am. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? And I like to share this openly because I want people to know there's nothing wrong with this. Even though I wasn't open about this at the beginning, when I was first going through this, I was very private in what I was doing and how I was coping and how I was learning to function again in a healthier way. And, I found a psychologist. I worked with him for 4 months. I found a wonderful counselor, a relationships focused counselor, communications counselor, and worked with her for about 3 months. Originally, it was going to be a marriage counselor for both of us, but after the first couple of sessions, we're like, no, my wife's good. I'm the one that needs the extra counseling. And so I really just dove into now doing inner work where everything before that was focused on either professional development or me working on the exterior. I didn't do any inner work. I didn't do any of that stuff. I avoided it. I was always like, that's woo-woo stuff. No way. You know what I mean? Like anything that came down to the mindset, came down to the interconnections, like even discussing vulnerability. What does that look like? Can I be honest and open with people, especially people that are close to me? And I struggled with all that. And so that was what I embraced. And in that 1 year, I grew so much. And my perspective, and just as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a husband, as a father, as a friend. And at the end of the year, I was like, you know what? I don't want to have a drink. And then at the end of 2 years, it's like, I still don't want to have a drink. I'm like just growing. I'm loving this so much. And so now it's been over 11 years. It just keeps going. Like there's not even a desire. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not even a thought. Like I've learned to function without it. And I love it, and it's very much in alignment with some of my health values. My lifestyle values. Also, having a chronic autoimmune disease helps with also solidifying some of my choices as it relates to health, because there's a bigger intention behind that. And so, yeah, anyways, I feel like I've been talking forever here. But that was sort of, the 20s and then my 30s was spent doing a lot of that. And then, your perspective changes. As you change as a person, sometimes your belief systems get shifted. Sometimes you look at things differently. Sometimes you look at your own life differently. And that's what I started to do. Started asking some big questions, like, what do I want for my life? I mean, Thomas, I don't know. Do you ever sit down and think, what do I want for my life? There's not like one of those conversations we sit down and think about every day, right? Or create the time to truly answer it.
What do I want to do when I get older?
Well, anything, right? Like, what do I want to be doing? How do I want to be showing up? Like, what is it I want to be remembered for? It's really interesting. And those things really started to shift 4 years ago for me because my father passed from pancreatic cancer. And we had the opportunity, because at this point in time, I had left my career of 17 years, my company that I co-founded. And because I was just like, I can't do this anymore. The things that I want, as soon as I started answering the question, what I want for my life, I started realizing the path I was on, Thomas, it wasn't going to allow me to achieve those things that I wanted. And that was scary. It was really scary. I equate it back to that 14-year-old boy looking in the mirror again, thinking, what am I going to do? I know I don't want to be here anymore. I know there's other things I want to be doing with my life, but how do I do it? And there's a lot of fear that comes up with that, right? The fear of the unknown, especially. And yet I knew it was something I needed to do. And so then it trying to reconcile, well, how do we make that transition? How do we start going for more of the things that we want to go for? And that was a whole nother, conundrum. But it was worthwhile pursuing because we knew we wanted to change. Long and short of it is, because of that, we had the opportunity. I had left that career. My father then got sick about a year later. We had the opportunity, because we had been traveling, to go spend those last 6 months with him, during that end of life period, which was amazing. I feel very grateful that we had that time, but had some of those earlier decisions and changes not have happened, that wouldn't have been an opportunity. So that's why I always, and this is where I get into that woo-woo thing about the universe, and like maybe things are just meant to happen in a certain way. And that idea of trusting our instinct and getting out of our own way has really been solidified for me. Do you know what I mean? Because I've seen it happen over and over again in my own life now. I'm like, I can't argue. Is this coincidence? Or is it just trusting that inner person, that inner voice that is trying to steer us the right way most of the time? I don't think it's ever trying to be devious. I don't think we're trying to self-sabotage, even though I know we do. I know I do too. But there is that inner voice that ultimately I feel knows best. And so how do we trust it more, right?
Well, you mentioned one thing which I thought might be valuable was you said that for a time, alcohol was a bit of a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
What did you, because I know you did some hard work on yourself, but what did you replace that with in the short term if someone else is in that particular situation?
Great. That's an awesome question, Thomas. Back at the time, because I'd already been quite active, but I did also find, though, that my intensity with fitness, my intentionality, even with my fitness routine, I was just always active. I'd be going hiking. I like weights. I had gotten quite involved in the CrossFit community. I still enjoyed cycling. We were just active as a family most of the time, but I found that the way I would show up for my workouts was always diminishing because alcohol was influencing it negatively. So even then I'd wake up the next day and I not feel like working out. I'm like, nope, I had a couple too many drinks last night. And then I'd find that the foods that I would eat the next morning were always different. I mean, we all know that, right? Like you drink a little too much, we all have our bangers and mash, right? Or what do they call it? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like we have some pretty good greasy spoons here in Vancouver. And I know that's where we would hang our hat after a night of drinking, right? Go eat these big breakfasts that were full of grease and clearly not very healthy. But so, certain other habits were starting to evolve based on that one habit. So as soon as I removed that one habit and just stopped doing it, I did realize I had to continue to do some of the other things that had served me well and start to refocus on those again. And so for me, it was just getting back to my fitness, getting back to my regular activity and being very purposeful with it. And what I found was, and what I experienced was, at the same time, I started taking an interest in CrossFit even more. And it was nice because there was a competitive edge to that, right? It's an individual sport. Even though they have other people competing against each other, I always looked at it more from the challenge individually. How much faster can I do this workout? How much more weight could I potentially move in a set period of time? Like I loved how they were quantifying some of the workouts because for me, that wants that number, wants to be able to quantify something, wants to be able to see improvement. It was really good for me. And I found that it was just what I needed as I was continuing to do that inner work. It gave me something to really focus on, get excited about, had a wonderful community attached to it. So it was the one piece that really was instrumental in helping my decisions to not drink sustain itself, and I got excited with that. Like I loved it. And I always recommend to people, like if there's a habit that you want to replace, replacing it with the health focused habit is a good strategy, because you said earlier, the endorphins, right? You're absolutely right. That you get that feel good endorphin surge when you exercise, you move your body, and if you're someone that loves to walk outside, like even just getting out for a walk in the fresh air, that is movement with a purpose. And it has a benefit to not only our mind and our spirit, but especially our body. And so you're checking off a lot of boxes through one activity. And I always like that. I like to, if I'm going to invest a certain amount of time and energy into something, what's just going to provide me with the greatest sort of benefit? And that's why I liked fitness and I like that kind of movement. So for me, that was one of the habits that really just, I hate to use the term easy. It's not a matter, nothing was really easy, but it definitely simplified the process for me,
I've heard many times that people, I don't know if this applies to you, but people with an addictive personality, if they apply it to something like fitness, that can be extremely rewarding, like get all sorts of valuable results from that.
You're absolutely right.
Just coming back to where you were before you moved from one side of the country to another, before you went to university, you touched on someone asking you for coaching. Did that, I know that was just one individual instance, but did that go very far in terms of?
Yeah. So, they were friends of my parents. And so we wouldn't see them that often, but I would guide them, tell them, some of the books that I had read. I'd introduce them to the gym. I'd invite them to come maybe do a workout with me, maybe go for a bike ride. It was more so just, it wasn't a formal coaching arrangement, but I was still coaching them.
You're sort of getting a taste of it, right?
Yeah, I was getting a taste of it for sure. But I did see with some of my peers though, because I had started to put on mass, but muscle mass, and also being a guy at 6'1", I was one of the bigger guys in my groups, and even though I was late to fitness, some of my friends that were very athletic, like I was getting gains, and I feel very fortunate that I have the body type that if I do want to apply myself to, especially some resistance training, I put on mass pretty easily, and so a lot of my friends were like, whoa, dude, I remember this one year I must have put on 25 pounds of muscle. It was crazy how much weight I'd put on, and in a good way, of course. And so I had a lot of these other guys like, oh, we want to work out with you, and that was, of course, it pumped up my ego, but it also got me really excited because I was now able to help all them, and they actually valued what I had to say. And so that was really, it was fun. it was fun, but when I reference the ego, I do know that that's drove a lot of my decisions for a long time, and was also a big part of why I was attracted to alcohol and how it made me feel. And, so it's one of those things I'm trying, if there's anything I can sort of clarify, is that I've recognized how my ego has influenced me in negative ways.
Yes,
based
self-awareness, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's just something that's come with age. And I know it sounds so cliche. I'm like, oh man, I think back to my parents. Oh, just wait till you're our age. I'd be like, whatever, I'm never getting that old. And of course here I am. But it's amazing, right? Like when you do embrace that change and you start to really apply yourself, it's wonderful what's possible for anyone, and right back to how I opened up, talking about the resiliency of us as a species. Like, it's already in us. Our ability to change is in us. It's just sometimes we have to, give it a little boost, a little bit of an initial push to generate some inertia to get that momentum built up. And that's once you get it moving, though, as long as you're getting around the right people. I really feel strongly about community. You need that support. We're social beings. And I look at all my shifts in my life, and I'm very grateful that I've had really strong communities to support unconditionally, as well as for the accountability. And so if there's any one thing that people take away from today, it's like, listen, if you want to make some changes, just make some changes. I know it sounds stupid to say it that way, but if you find a community of like-minded people that are embracing this new lifestyle or new habit you want to create, it feels like it's less effort. It really does. But it's also going to make it harder on those days where you're like, that little voice in your mind's like, it hasn't really become a lifestyle yet. And it's like, it's that early morning. It's like, you're looking at the running shoes and it's like, I'd rather stay in bed a little bit longer. Sky's looking gray. It's going to rain. Maybe I'll just go for a run later. Right. But if you've been accountable to somebody else to show up for that run, or you've got a coach you got to report to that morning, log that workout. It's just a lot harder to say no to somebody else, especially when we've made a commitment to them, let alone a commitment to ourselves that we haven't told anybody about. And I think everybody's probably on the other side like, oh yeah, I've done that. Or I continue to do that. Man, I continue to do that too. Like, it's all good. I'm not here to criticize or to judge, but I do recognize it's just a trait that many of us have. And it's just, again, another strategy to help you get through that. And that's why I love the accountability, but more than that, the community connection. And it's pretty cool. We have lots of community options online. It's not quite the same thing as the in-person. But for now, hey, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's just another tool, isn't it? That you can add an accountability partner.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the start of your business. When did that happen and what does it look like?
So, okay, my original business was fitness equipment and supplements, apparel. We were doing commercial as well as retail. So we had 8 retail stores as well as some B2B enterprises and e-com all across the country. And so did that for 17 years. It was a lot of fun. I met some amazing people, learned a ton. But, towards the end there, I realized it wasn't fulfilling me the way I wanted to be fulfilled. Wasn't allowing me to embrace some other things that I wanted more in my life. Like I wanted more time with my family. That was a priority. Because, when you're growing and scaling a company and this actually almost sounds like an excuse. I want to take that away because I know of other entrepreneurs out there that, wow, that somehow they've been able to do it. I struggled with it, that idea of balancing my relationships at home as well as my commitment to work and my career. I struggled with that. Not so much now, but I did. And so I knew that there were some changes we wanted to make. And fortunately for me, I started blogging and creating online content about 14 years ago. And just because it was a passion of mine. I always enjoyed writing. I like that creative aspect. For me, it was very cathartic, but it also made me feel fulfilled. But it was something I could do on the side. It was a few years after that, and I was still working at my previous company. And I had a friend that was in the digital marketing space, and he asked me actually to come in and speak to his networking group that he runs, this monthly mastermind group. And so I came in to speak. And then after the talk, we got to talking, and I was talking about my blog and all this excitement I was having with building this sort of like online profile, and just how I was able to help so many more people than just the people here in Vancouver. Like I just shared with him how good I was feeling about that. And I remember him looking at my analytics because he asked to look at him, and I showed him. He's like, "Dude, are you making any money with this?" I'm like, "Well, you can make money doing this stuff?" I had no idea, Thomas. No, like so green, right? And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Really?" Oh, and so he gave me a little bit of a brief education on it. I was like, "Wow, this is kind of cool." And I just kept doing that, kept building it, and then brands started reaching out to me. As well as other individuals. And it was really interesting. And some pretty big companies like Walt Disney, Nike, Microsoft, like some really big brands were starting to reach out to me. And so I was getting opportunities to do some more speaking. I was getting opportunities to do some brand campaigns, some spokesperson work. And I was like, wow, this is a lot of fun. But the cool thing is a lot of this is just online. Wow, I know, me being in the retail space, it's like it's brick and mortar, and it might as well be called ball and chain, because it's really what it is. I couldn't ever get away for a long time because that's the operations. It's not built the way for me to be like a nomad, a digital nomad, right? But we knew that was more the lifestyle that we wanted, because it was aligning with a lot of our values and the things that we wanted, like more time with family, the ability to travel, the ability to meet people around the world. Like all these boxes were getting checked as we started to look more and more into the digital space. And so we transitioned, took a leap of faith. We're like, well, I don't have enough income coming in from the online efforts to replace what we had with my current company and income. But we have belief. We know we can do this, and at the same time, I was writing a book, and it was just getting ready to be published. So at the same time as the book was being published, I was leaving my past company so we could get rid of all our stuff. I literally quit my job. My wife quit hers a month later. A few months after that, we pulled the kids out of school, gave away all of our stuff, kept one car, whatever we could fit in the back of that SUV. That's what we took with us. And we just started heading south. We started traveling, and we sort of called it an impromptu book tour, right? It was sort of that way that we were sort of positioning it, even though we already knew, well, we're going, we don't know when we'll be back. Like there was no agenda. Like, dude, a lot of people were like, you guys are nuts. Like, where are you going? I don't know. We're just going to start driving. We had some friends in Seattle. We're like, well, that'll be our first stop. We'll go there. And we ended up just hanging out there for a couple of weeks. And then we went on our way and continued down south. We were chasing the sun, to be honest. Like, this was January, Vancouver in January. I'm sure, Thomas, knowing the weather that you're accustomed to, it's pretty much the same, So we were like, no, sunshine, please, warmth, please, enough of these parkas. And so we went south. And at the same time, I started to embrace coaching because I had people reaching out that wanted support. I knew I could support them and help them. And it sort of evolved over the last 6 years, different services, different offerings online, a lot of speaking, not as much with the year that we've had, but that's starting to pick up again. A lot of them have been virtual events, and just, continuing to just try to support people. But I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have an idea of what's the business going to look like. I just knew that I had some skills. I knew that other people out there were doing this and doing it in a big way. And I knew I had enough knowledge that I'm very coachable. I can be taught new things. I remember finding my first business coach. I get in this space, a business coach I started to work with. Well, we lived in Bali for 2.5 years during the 6 years that we were away. And while I was there, I hired a coach and developed some signature systems and programs. And I know you're familiar with this in the space that you're in. And, we brought that out and we presented it, and we had all these people that wanted to partake. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. We sold out that very first program, and then we sold out the next one, and we sold out the next one. And I was like, wow, this is fun. I get to help people just live their life the way they want to live it, and can see that improvement. And it was like, this is awesome. I want to just keep doing this, and that's sort of just how it's evolved, and people still ask me, say, well, what do you do exactly? And I'm like, I do this and this and this and this. But I tell people, then they're always very quick. Wow, you sound super busy. I go, well, actually I'm not, but my days are very full. They are full, but they're full of the choices and the commitments that I want to make. Like, I'm not doing anything I don't want to be doing right now. And that's a very freeing feeling. And
You
it's
were
only
doing,
recently, I got to be honest with you though, Thomas, like, because I get this asked from people like, well, how do you sustain this? And I'm like, there's been months where it's just month to month, man. And we're making just enough to make it by. Very, very straight up, but we've become very aware of our finances. We're very good at planning now, especially forecasting of incomes and what's coming in, what's going out. A couple kids, they needed braces. They needed, oh man, just kids, like they're a big investment. They're worth it. Big investment, And so, there's been all these things that we've had to learn and embrace and get really good at doing so we could sustain this lifestyle. And it's only in the last year I replaced my original income. So it's only now, almost 5-6 years later that I've finally got to a point where, my previous income's now been replaced. And, but now it's on my terms. I get to do what I want to do. So it's a nice thing to celebrate, and I do realize it didn't come overnight, but it was worth it, all that work.
well, you said you were co-founder of that original business.
Yes.
Did you exit that business? Did you sell your
I did.
part of it in order to fund your Bali travel?
I wish. So what ended up happening was I left, and my business partner was 20 years my senior, and so I came on, was working with a previous company that he was a joint venture partner in. And this is actually pretty interesting. So here he is. He's already got this part of this national company, a national chain in Canada. It's the largest chain in Canada for fitness equipment. And he was a joint venture partner for Western Canada. So I started working with him while I was still going to university. I was still going to UBC, but I was working part-time selling equipment. And I loved it. I excelled really, really quickly. Because again, I was very coachable. I was hungry. It was also the first time I was ever in a position where it was before performance-based pay. So the more people I served and helped, basically the more people I could help get healthier, the more money I made. And I was like, is this legit? This is real? Like, this is awesome. And I was like, oh, I love this. This is great. So, what happened was I ended up, as school was winding down, I went on full time and I got promoted into management really quickly, which was great because there was a different bonus structure, more potential. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. And I was debating whether I wanted to go back to school, be a lawyer or a teacher. That was really my only option. With philosophy and English lit, you're kind of limited with choices. So I then started to make more money than teachers. And I was very close to lawyers that were partners, in firms. And I was like, but my lifestyle was awesome. I was like, it's a 40-hour work week. I'm working during the days my days off are typically, during the week because I work on weekends and, things are really good. They were great. And there came a point where he had this partner that I was working for, he had a falling out with his other partners and they ended up separating, going off as independents. And so he had to start again. And he was my mentor, my first real business mentor. And I felt very loyal to him. And so when the opportunity came about to go off and start something new, I was like, yeah, I'm in. Let's do this. And so fortunately for me, 20 years more in business, 20 years my senior, he had all the equity. Okay. I didn't, because I was still in my early 20s at this point and still very early on in my career. And, but he was the money guy and I could be a workhorse and I knew what to do and I knew how to do it really well, but I also had to learn new skills as we went, I was just a really good manager at that time, a good trainer, a good sales guy, but I had to learn a lot of new skills as we started to grow the companies and, we went from one location to 8 and, e-com and all that stuff, it was all stuff I had to learn. And long and short of it, I was a junior partner. All right. I didn't own the majority of the company. It's not like a 50-50 here. But I was paid really, really well. The bonuses were well, it was awesome. No complaints. And the intention was for me to start buying down more of the company as he was going to exit over time.
Okay.
And, but I didn't want to be there anymore, and that was the scary part. You get to this place where it's just like, I just don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be doing this anymore. We were in a down market at that time. It wasn't a good time to sell. And he knew it and I knew it. Plus, that extra equity to come out to buy out my shares, it just wasn't feasible for the company. And from a cash flow perspective. So we made an arrangement to just maintain my shares. I'll just go off and do my own thing. So I'll basically be a silent partner, non-voting rights, just have that equity tied up. Well, a few years ago, we got to a point where, we just got to deal with this. We got to get rid of this. One, it's kind of like a liability. They had some expansion plans and they had to clean up the shareholders arrangements. And so I had to take a buyout, and it wasn't what it was worth, but it was enough, for me to just say, okay, whatever, to be done with this and be free and clear of it, not have to deal with any of the stress or any of the other attachments that were with that. It was very free, but it wasn't any amount that I could retire on or anything like that. And we didn't have any of those finances for our travels. We had actually started traveling before that. We had very minimal savings because most of my equity was tied up in the company. But we made it work. And so this is why I say people are always like, well, I would never want to go traveling with my family for a prolonged period of time unless I had the money in the bank. And I'm like, well, if you look at your lifestyle, like we eliminated our overhead, we downsized to one vehicle, when you eliminate a lot of your overhead and over the costs that are just part of what your normal life looks like, and you start to reallocate that, you realize, and we realized that, we can maintain that travel lifestyle on a fraction of what our monthly overhead was living in downtown Vancouver. It was really clear to us when we started to plan it out. And yet, we wouldn't be staying at 5-star hotels. Okay. We're not going over the moon, but we were going to travel modestly and just have experiences,
if you were counseling yourself at that time, would you have advised yourself to do anything different right at the beginning of that arrangement, or are you fairly happy with how it all went?
Yeah, I think, well, for me, there came a period of time there where we did dip into a line of credit, and really, I became quite overextended. There was a bit of stress there, there was a fair bit of stress. And we were fortunate. We had a couple good launches, and so that wasn't really a problem anymore. But we still had these liabilities outstanding, and we wanted to just be free of all the debt. And I think I would advise myself to have a clear debt repayment plan, a way of servicing the debt. Because for us, we had some of that time. We were just like, well, we'll get to that later. Once we have, a more stable income source, we'll start to service that debt rather than the bare minimums. And I think it would have been much more responsible had I had a really tight repayment plan, or had eliminated most of that debt before we went traveling. That would have been a much more sound and smart idea. And I would advise other people, because if you're going to use debt and then create more debt to go and chase your dream, there's a lot of risk. And, I have a family, I got a couple kids. It's not like I was a solo dude. It's but my wife and I, just so you're aware of this, and anybody that's listening to this, we had conversations about this too. We knew the risk. And we actually got to that point where we're like, well, what is the worst that can happen? And this is sort of, I don't know if you've seen the Tim Ferriss TEDx talk where he talks about fear setting, but that is this exercise where you can basically just ask yourself, and you sort of just let your imagination go, and you're ready to embrace maybe some big change. It's like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? So what's the worst thing we can happen? We go through with this, we start traveling. We're like, well, we run out of money. The vehicle breaks down. We don't have 2 nickels to rub together. What do we do? And we're like, well, we have family that cares for us. They've already told us they've got spare bedrooms. If we need to crash there, we can crash there. We're very employable. Like the skill sets that we have between the two of us, we're very employable. And I know that without a doubt. And, I field the headhunter calls quite regularly. So I know that there's opportunity if we ever needed it. So I knew we'd be okay from that standpoint. Now, of course, there's the other stuff, like going to Southeast Asia. It's like, okay, do we need some shots? Do we have to get some vaccines? What's it like to travel there? What's it like for money? Where are we going to live? There's all those little things that you got to worry about too. But we really wanted to think, what's the worst? And that was sort of the worst thing that we could really imagine, was that was the most real thing that we felt was realistically possible, right? Was this idea of just running out of money and not having money coming in and just kind of being stranded, and fortunately it never happened, but it was good to have that conversation, because then we sort of knew what was the risk going into that, even knowing that, well, we have this fair bit of debt there. We don't have a plan to service it, but we're going to go do this anyways, And so that's, if I'm perfectly honest with you, that's sort of the biggest concerns we had right around that time when we were leaving.
Okay. So what does the business activity look like now, and what are your goals for it?
Yeah, I love that you asked that because, I think like many of us, we've experienced a fair bit of change over the last year. I was forecasted, we were moving back to Vancouver so our kids could finish high school here. My family moved back 6 months before I did because I still had retreats and speaking engagements, and I was doing some work for some brands over there. So I had a 6-month commitment to maintain before I could relocate back to Vancouver with them. This is all pre-COVID. Like literally, when I returned back, it was a month and a half later, full lockdown happens. So it's just, I mentioned earlier, sort of the woo-woo, the universe is trying to tell you something, things work out for a reason. It was like, it just worked out that way. I was back and I feel very grateful that we were back and situated back here in a very comfortable, safe way when all that happened. But I had already booked out a lot of talks and a lot of other opportunities were booked in for my year. I was on track projecting a freaking best year. I was like, this is gonna be great. That's gonna be awesome. Coming back to Vancouver, I'll be back in North America. Because that was a sticking point for a lot of brands and opportunities I was presented with was I needed to be in North America. A lot of people weren't willing to pay the extra travel costs and expenses. And that's fair. I understand people work with budgets. So being back in North America, I was like, yeah, okay, well, now I can reconnect with everybody. We can just really reestablish what I was doing before, but do it in a bigger way. And I had to change all that because 80% of my revenues that was forecasted for the year went away, literally in a matter of weeks. And I've heard this same sort of story from a lot of other people, especially people that are in event-based businesses, or a lot of the revenues come from participating in events, which for me, a good chunk of that, I was doing a lot of keynoting. And so I had to adjust. So I sort of, I launched a couple new programs, started doing a bit more. I was very focused on the social I was putting out as well. I like to tell a story. I'm someone that would rather show than tell. So when I'm telling a story, I'll often ask a question to cause that reflection, but then I often will explain how that answer is showing up for me right now. My answer, how I'm experiencing the answer to that question, and invite people to join me in that conversation. And it's been wonderful. But because of those conversations, I was able to identify some other needs that very real in my audiences. And so I was very quick to sort of pivot and create some options, create some conversations, and brought on a lot of new clients, and was able to sort of offset that. So now my business, I coach 1.5 days a week. So typically Wednesdays and Thursdays are my coaching days. Monday's like an admin day. Tuesday's sort of a creative day. And then I take Friday through Sundays off. And with the exception today, you're my only commitment this morning. But that's sort of what it looks like. And I'm, again, starting to do a lot more talks. I do trainings, like leadership trainings, as well as lifestyle trainings for corporations and organizations. And, listen, I'm all about having fun. and all about supporting people to really live their healthiest life. And that, I mean that from being physically fit, emotionally fit, financially fit, as well as psychologically fit. And so I incorporate all that element into what I do. And it's just fun, man. It's what I like to do.
Well, thank you very much for telling your story. I loved it. And awesome. Dai, can you tell us where the best place for people to find you is?
Well, thank you, Thomas. This has been a wonderful conversation, even though I feel it's been very one-sided. And but I love your questions. I love how you hold space. I really, you make it really easy to talk. I just want to commend you and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share a bit of my story today. And I really hope that people resonated with this and picked up on something. But so when I'm sharing about where you can find me, please find me. Have a conversation. And when it comes to social media, I'm most active on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. All you have to do is type in my name, Dai, D-A-I, Manuel, M-A-N-U-E-L. And you'll find me. That's the nice thing about having a unique name. All the social platforms, we're unencumbered. So every time a platform pops up, like even, Clubhouse as of late, Dai Manuel, it's like really easy. And, but I have a website. DaiManuel.com, as I told you earlier. I've been blogging now into my 15th year, and there's 1,800 content articles on there that are all geared towards what I've been talking about today. as well as a ton of free resources. The site's being redesigned right now, so we just got a working piece up there, but it's functional, so you can get into the content. You can just sort of dive in and look into other ways of maybe working through some of the challenges or some of the changes that you want to make. There's lots there. I apologize a little bit because I know people will criticize. Like, I go there and it's like I get stuck. It's like article to article to article. But you know what? It's value add content. You have questions about it, reach out to me. I'm always around.
Dai Manuel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas.